Hello everyone, it is Zero G Coasters, and today I will be doing a Florida roller coaster tier list. This tier list includes most major rides in Florida, although a major exception is left out, and that is Velocicoaster. I believe this list was made, by the way, it was not made by me, before 2020, so it does not include that ride, although it does include Iron Gwazi because it was announced in 2020, at least, or 2019, I'm not sure. So let's kick off the list with Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. I got a ride on this last week, and I thought it was pretty good. Mainly because, first of all, I was in the front row, and it was a cool experience. And second of all, it was at night. And third of all, it was during the grand finale of the Disney Magic Kingdom fireworks show for the Halloween party, which made it incredible. Now, I'm not going to put it in S tier. I mean, if I did that, I would probably get so much hate. But I'm going to put it in C tier. I know this is controversial, but I think it's just a mid coaster in general, although it's kind of fun. Our next coaster is Rock and Roller Coaster. I'm also going to put this one at mid tier. I mean, I really haven't ridden this thing in a long time, but I can remember it to be pretty forceful, although it's pretty much Flight of Fear. Next up is Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. I don't want to put this in bad because I don't think it's really a bad ride. I just don't think it really appeals to me. I think some of the moments are tame, although it has quite a few moments of airtime too, so I'm just going to put it in C tier too. Next up is Cheetah Hunt, and I'm going to put this in B tier. I think this is a great family thrill coaster. I think the Windcatcher Tower is amazing, the launches are pretty good, and the inversion is very fun. So overall, it's just a really fun experience, especially with the setting it goes through. Next up is Cobra's Curse, and I think this is, again, a mid-ride, but again, it is a family coaster. Although I think a lot of the moments are fun, in the backwards section, and the part where you're spinning is really good too. I'll put this behind Rock and Roller Coaster for now. Next up is Expedition Everest. I haven't ridden this in a long time either, but I'm gonna put it at B tier. It's a good roller coaster. I think the theming and effects are really good, and I think it's probably the most thrilling Disney coaster, other than one that I will mention at the end of this video. Next up is Freedom Flyer, and I think this goes in the C tier as well. I think it's just a good family coaster. It's definitely not as intense as a ride like Dragon Flyer, but for what it is, it's a good ride. I will put it at middle of the mid tier. Also, I'm rearranging stuff as I go. Next up is Galaxy Spin. This is the first ride I'm going to put in the D tier, mainly because I do not like Wild Mouse coasters, just because of the laterals, and I do not like laterals much. The next coaster is Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure. I think the ride itself is just an A tier ride. I mean, the few surprises that I have are pretty good, and just the ride is super long. But of course the theming and experience bumps it up to S tier for me. I think it is truly an immersive experience, and well, it's supposed to be that way. And it's just an amazing ride. Next up is the Incredible Hulk Coaster. I will put this at the top of B tier. When I rode it a few days ago, I found it was very intense. I mean, even if I was not in the back row, I was in row 6, I got whipped around in most elements, and I grayed out on the Cobra Roll and the Vertical Loop, which is kind of rare for a B&M, but it's still a really good ride. Next up is Hurricane, and I think this ride is very janky and awkward, but it's so fun, and that's why I'm putting it at the C tier. It has a few good airtime moments, and dare I say, a lot of laterals, but these are the type of laterals I do not mind, honestly. That's the weird part about it. Next up is Icebreaker. I'm going to put this at the A tier. I think the backwards and forwards swing launch section is really nice, and you get some very good pops of airtime on the step ups, step downs, or whatever they are. And the top hat going over it gives a ton of airtime. The rest of the ride gives good bunny hills and some decent forces, so I think it's overall just an amazing ride. Next up is Iron Gwazi, the elephant in the room here. Definitely going to go over Hagrid's as the best coaster in Florida for me, and my number one coaster. I spoiled it for my top 50, but there you go. It's just an amazing ride overall. It has a lot of airtime, it gives quite a few positives, you have hang time, you just have everything in it that makes it such a great experience. Next up is Kraken. I think this ride is very cool, but I don't really see much past that. I think it gives some forces, but other than that, it's really not much, so I'm going to put it at B tier, above Expedition Everest, but behind Cheetah Hunt. Next up is Kumba. I think this is basically Kraken, but just a little bit better. I'm going to put it behind Incredible Hulk Coaster, because I think Incredible Hulk Coaster is pretty good, but I think this is a fair spot for it. I think it's very intense in most sections, and I do like the theming and scenery and the tunnel you dive through towards the end. Next up is Mako, and this ride is also going to go in the S tier, above Hagrid's barely, but still it's an amazing ride. You get a ton of airtime, especially on the 5-second floater hill. Think of it as if you've rode Candemonium, or in not Mako, think of it if you've rode Candemonium as Candemonium but way better, with more airtime in almost every hill. Next up is Manta. I will be also putting this at the A tier, a bit lower than Icebreaker, but I still think it's a very fun ride. I think for what it is, there's a lot of cool sensations on it. I mean, it's a flying coaster. The pretzel loop is absolutely amazing in the back row, and a lot of the water features and scenery you go by is amazing too. Overall, it's just an amazing ride. Okay, well I haven't explained the tiers yet, but I think if you've read the side, you know. S is incredible, A is amazing, B is good, C is mid, D is bad, and I put this one tier down here for Mind Blower. So you know what coaster is next, and what tier I'm going to put it in? Mind Blower. Of course I'm putting it in S tier ahead of Iron Gwazi. Oops, that did not go ahead of Iron Gwazi. Of course I'm kidding, it is a F tier ride for me, and that's why I made its own tier. I think the ride is actually pretty fun, but the roughness absolutely kills every part of it, and it makes it such an unenjoyable experience. Next up is Space Mountain. I got a pitch black ride on this a few days ago, and I thought it was pretty good. Although it really does not have much other than a bit of airtime. So I'm going to put it at C tier, behind Cobra's Curse, but ahead of Freedom Flyer. Next up on my list is Montu, a B&M inverted coaster. And this ride is just intensity, forces, it's so punchy in every way. And that's why it's going to go into the S tier, barely above Hagrid's, but behind Mako. I think every part of the ride is just very, very intense, and you gray out in most sections, especially the Batwing, which is uber intense. Next up is Revenge of the Mummy. I rode this ride with the new theme or the effects or whenever it reopened after its refurbishment a few days ago, and I have not ridden it before, but I can tell you I thought the ride was very fun, and there were a lot of good effects, especially the fire, and the surprise stuff is very good as well. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of B tier. It's a good ride. Next up is Primeval Whirl. This is a defunct coaster, but I did ride it a few years ago, so I will put it on here. And guess where it's going? It's going right here with Galaxy Spin, but it has, I guess, a bit of theming, so I'm gonna put it over. But yeah, it's not much more than a Wild Mouse, although I did have a lot of fun on it. Next up is Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, and I have mixed feelings about this ride. I think the airtime's really good, and I think actually just the pacing and stuff is not the best, if you know what I'm saying with the mid-course brake runs. But I still think it's a fun ride. And by the way, my song I chose on my ride in the front row was... By the way, the song I chose on my ride was All the Small Things by Blink-182, which is a secret song, by the way. But still, because of its funness, I'm going to be putting it at the middle of B tier. Next up is Sand Serpent, and basically it's the same thing as these two, but it doesn't spin, so I'm going to be putting it in the D tier. Next up is Scorpion. I get that this is a very old Schwarzkopf coaster, but it is definitely not a good ride. It's very janky, it does not feel like a good ride at all, so I'm just going to be putting it at the top of D tier. Our next coaster is SheiKra, and by the way I switched around these two after I thought about it a bit more, but I think SheiKra fits pretty good in the B tier. It's a very good dive coaster, not much more than that. Next up is Slinky Dog Dash. It's a mock family launch coaster. I don't have more to say than that. I'll put it at the, I'd say, middle of C tier. It doesn't have forceful launches or anything, but I think it's still a fun ride for what it is. Next up is Tigris, which is a Skyrocket 2. Again, it's a mid-ride. I don't really hate the comfort collars, but they definitely limit some of the airtime you can get on this ride. Although it just is a fun experience, I definitely really recommend checking out the soundtrack of this ride. It's very good, and while you hear it in the station while the ride's passing by, that's pretty good. So I'll just put it at the middle of C tier. And finally, we have White Lightning. I think this ride is actually really good. I barely have it in my top 50, and it's probably gonna stay that way. I legit have this at the number 50 spot in my top 50, and I do not think it will change. So I will be putting it right here, in between SheiKra and the Incredible Hulk coaster. I think the airtime's pretty good, it's very smooth, especially with the Titan track in some spots, and just it's an overall well-rounded wooden coaster. Anyways, that's going to be it for this tier list of the Florida roller coasters. I'd have Velocicoaster right here between Iron Glossy and Mako, and Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, which is a ride I got to ride. I have to make its own review about it because I have a lot of thoughts to say about it. Not necessarily good or bad. Well, I don't know how to say it, but look out for a review soon, because that will be one of my next videos. Anyways, this is Zero G Coaster signing out. Have a great rest of your day, and